Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about crafting siege crossbows. Siege crossbows are at their best on grenade builds. In fact, that is the only place that you would use them, but I know grenades have been one of the more popular builds to league start this league. This is something that is for 0.4.0. If you're watching this video in 0.5.0 or later, please check whether this still works or not, because there's often a lot of changes. All 0.3.0 videos for crafting, for example, no longer apply. Now, I've also done an article format version of this on gaming strategy site Mobalytics, and I'll put a link to that down in the description below. And it is also loosely based upon a somewhat similar craft that Lockerhole put together when talking about strong mid-budget talismans. Lockerhole's approach is a little bit more expensive because talismans require different mods, but it is something that will definitely come in the 5 to 10 divine range and probably closer to 5. My strategy, however, is quite a bit cheaper because grenades require different modifiers on them, and also because we're settling for a couple of mods that aren't the best thing that you can get, but they are useful and they're available reasonably cheaply. Most favorably though, we don't need increased attack speed. That's the thing that makes crafting siege crossbows way better than other sorts of crafting. Now, this guide's been put together very early league, and prices, as always, fluctuate a lot within Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2, so prices can change. Just check, the most expensive reagents we're going to use are going to be one Omen of Dextral Crystallization. This is currently in the 2.25 to 2.5 Divine Orb range, but it can change a lot. And if they do get really expensive, there is an alternate approach you can take, but that's going to add in some RNG. We also want one Perfect Essence of Battle, which will be used in a very late step, and they're about 3/4 of Divine. Other than that, the early steps are going to be very much throwing a lot of attempts at a craft, but there's a couple of interesting failure conditions you can hit along the way, where you can accidentally make something that's not what you want, but that's perfect for someone else. If you're playing in Trade League, you can then turn around and sell that, potentially actually for more than the reagents had cost you. And if you're playing in solo self-found, you can just squirrel those aside as a maybe use later category, and then start over with a new setup. So what are our goals here? We want to have 4 explicit modifiers on our crossbow. The first one of these is tier 1 or tier 2 increased physical percent damage. The second one of these is tier 3 flat physical damage. Getting higher than tier 3 is going to require RNG, and we're not going for that because this is a budget craft. Our third explicit modifier we're going for is a little bit of a settle. There are better choices than this. There is a modifier that can be deterministically added through Abyss content, and this is 101 to 121% increased grenade damage. This is something that we're going to go for here as a bit of a settle. The better things we could have would be either to have increased physical damage percent and also accuracy hybrid, but this is very hard to force onto the item, or alternately, increased percentage elemental damage with attacks would also be superior if you got a really high roll on it, but again, no real way to get that deterministically, whereas we can deterministically add on this Amanamu mod. For suffixes, we are going to go with the Perfect Essence of Battle +5 to the level of attack skills. Note that you can get projectile skills in the core mod pool on crossbows. You can't actually get attack skills, but you can get attack skills through the use of a Perfect Essence of Battle. That's going to be one of our last steps, and it's going to be the expensive one. Before we get into the core craft though, there is one very important principle we need to discuss. This is selling and starting over. You are quite likely in the early steps of this to create something that is a genuinely good item, but that has no further use in the crafting flow that we're going through. If this happens, do not turn around and sell that to a vendor. Instead, try and sell it to another player if you're playing in Trade League. If you're playing in solo self-found, just sit it aside. Remember that your future self might be very, very happy to have that item if in the future you want to have a different crafting setup. And there's even one very unlikely contingency that could happen where you end up accidentally creating something that's a step towards a complete masterpiece. If you do happen to hit that, then you're going to want to sell that item and start over, and the amount that you sell it for might be enough to buy a far superior crossbow to what we're going to end up creating here. Just always keep in mind, anytime that you create something that looks like it's a good item, but that isn't what we're trying to make, see if you can sell and start over. That will save you a lot of currency, and that's just a general principle for crafting in Path of Exile 1 and 2, but it's more important in this craft than in others. One other question, why are we using a siege crossbow rather than a cheaper base? Because siege crossbows are best in slot by so much on a grenade build that using anything else would just be a waste of the crafting resources we're throwing here. Also, I want to remind you, we don't need attack speed here. It's not a dead stat on grenade builds, but it's not a very important one. So that's going to make our crafting process cheaper than it would be if we were trying to craft a different type of weapon. Okay, so let's get into step one. Welcome to the RNG component of the craft. Now, in my experience, and I will say I've only got a sample size of about 100 here, so you could be more lucky, you could be less lucky, either way it could happen. But in my experience, it feels like it's about a 10% chance. This is going to cost you about 16 exalts per try at the prices I was paying when I was recording this video. Actually dropped in price to something like 13 exalts overnight. This step relies upon just how powerful perfect transmutes and perfect augments are. These are not particularly rare crafting orbs, they're very available. The time I'm recording this video, perfect transmutes are about 1 exalt each, and perfect augments are about 3.25 exalts each. These ban not just low tier modifiers, but also middle tier modifiers as well. And what this means is that if you roll something that's the right type of modifier, it's guaranteed to be one of the best types. Specifically for what we care about. If you roll plus to the level of projectile skills, it will be +7 because +6 is too low in level and is therefore banned. If you roll plus percentage physical damage, here we end up with tier 1 Merciless or tier 2 Tyrannical. We could end up with Tyrannical, but that's fine. Tyrannical is really good. In fact, most of the time, you're going to settle for Tyrannical here because Merciless is rarer. Our goal in the first phase is to get a magical siege crossbow that has Merciless or Tyrannical as its only prefix, and it needs to have a suffix on it, and that suffix needs to not be something that we consider super precious. If we do end up getting a super precious suffix, then that's a point where you might sell and start over to someone that's doing a non-budget version of this craft. Our reagents here are really simple. We want an item level 82 siege crossbow. Don't skimp on the 82. If you skimp on the 82, you can't roll Merciless, and therefore the times that you do hit, you'll end up getting more disappointing results. And we want a perfect orb of transmutation and a perfect orb of augmentation. And we just go and we apply both of them to the crossbow. Now, there are several things that can happen here. There are a couple of win conditions. What we want is Merciless or Tyrannical with a filler suffix. For example, gain life on killing a monster. That would be a good example of a filler suffix because you can just remove that at a later stage and not feel bad about it. And we can also hit a jackpot for someone else if we hit +7 to the level of projectile skills with a filler prefix. It's not the one we want. So do keep an eye out for that. If you get that, you'll probably be able to sell it for multiple divines if you're playing in Trade League. And if you're playing in Solo Self-Found, you can definitely put that one aside for future use. Now, the failure state is when you get neither of these mods. In this situation, actually check whether the crossbow that you've got is going to be desirable for anyone. If you can see a potential use case for one of the mods on it, then it might be worth listing it for sale. This is what I've been doing. Every time that I've hit tier 1 of an elemental damage roll, I've been then turning around and selling it for a good percentage of a divine orb. Every time that I've hit tier 1 accuracy, I've tried to sell it in case there's someone playing an Amazon build that wants that. That hasn't sold, so maybe I've been overpricing those. And if you hit tier 1 elemental damage %, then this isn't something that's particularly great, but it's also not complete trash either, and you can turn around and try to sell that too. Just list your failed attempts for sale, most of the time for less than the cost of the reagents, but sometimes you might even find that you get more than the cost of the reagents, especially if you get one of those tier 1 flat elemental damage rolls or +7 to all skills, then you'll be able to sell it for considerably more than you put in. Now let's quickly touch on the absolute dream. You get either Merciless or Tyrannical as your prefix, and you get +7 to the level of projectile skills as your suffix. This is an absolute dream situation. You have a very valuable item, and it's actually too valuable for the future steps in this crafting process. So at this point, sell and start over, but do not sell cheap. This is something that will sell for a lot of currency. Or alternately, sell your crafting starting point that you've made and turn around and buy a crossbow that is better than you'll end up getting out of this entire process. And then a few percent of the time, you'll get the lesser jackpot of +7 to the level of projectile skills, but without getting any useful prefix for us at all, and not a prefix that anyone else wants either. In that situation, just turn around and sell it. Someone that's doing a recombination heavy craft may end up wanting it, and there's a few other scenarios where someone will want that particular item. So when that happens, sell it for a markup and then start over. Here's the goal. This is the starting point that I had when I was performing this craft the first time. I had this Tyrannical Siege Crossbow of Assimilation. The suffix on this is complete and utter garbage. I have no interest in that, which is a good thing because we're going to remove it with an essence later. And we have 167% increased physical damage, which is still second tier, but it is a good roll for second tier. So most of the time when you get to this point, you're going to end up with a tier 2 physical damage modifier, but you might end up with tier 1 sometimes as well, and that will obviously end up with a better result. Both these outcomes though, tier 1 physical damage percent and tier 2 physical damage percent, both of them are good enough to continue with. Now, this item is not useful yet, but the next step is actually going to get it most of the way there. And the best part is that the next steps are completely deterministic. So, step 2. This is a very simple, very deterministic step. We are going to use a Greater Essence of Abrasion. Greater Essence of Abrasion guarantees tier 3 physical flat damage. This is fantastic. This is the reason we want the item to be magical at this point, and it is the reason that we did not use recombination to get to the point that we have this Tyrannical Siege Crossbow of Assimilation. We now apply this essence, and deterministically, we end up with something like Broodcore here. So here we have 2 hotly desirable prefixes and 1 complete and utter garbage suffix. Now you could use this as is, but there is a very deterministic way to make it considerably better, and this is where that Amanamu modifier comes along. So that's our step 3. Step 3 is completely deterministic as well, and this is the Abyss step. Here, we are going to use 2 omens at once. Reminder, you can use 2 crafting omens at the same time, and they will both apply. So our next goal here is to apply an excellent but not perfect third prefix. This cost me 4 exalts when I did it last night, and could cost you 5 exalts on a bad day. So we're going to use a preserved jawbone. These are half an exalt the time I was researching this video, an omen of the liege, which was a quarter of an exalt, and an omen of sinistral necromancy, which was 3 1/4 exalts at the time that I was researching this video. So put both omens into your inventory and right click both of them. You want to make sure at this point that they are both red. So they've got to have this red outline on them. That indicates that they're ready to go. Please double, triple, quadruple check this every time you're about to use an omen, because you only need to make a mistake with this once and you'll regret all the times that you didn't double check. It's like double checking that the door is locked when you walk out of your house. Something that's very easy to do and very, very worthwhile. At this point, fire away, desecrate your crossbow, and then make the pilgrimage over to Act 2 to the Well of Souls. You are going to get this. Now you might be thinking, oh, desecration, this is an RNG process, right? No, it is not. Now the reason that this is not an RNG process is because of 2 factors. Firstly, there are only 5 Amanamu modifiers that are possible. Omen of the Liege guarantees that every single slot that can be an Amanamu modifier will be, or at least it almost always guarantees that. I've heard reports from some people that they've seen 1 exception in a million somewhere, but I have not personally experienced that. So you're going to get 3 options, and there are 5 possible Amanamu modifiers. But we're also using the omen of sinistral necromancy. Now this bans you from rolling Amanamu suffixes, because otherwise you would be able to roll suffixes because the item does have space for a suffix on it. So that means that you're going to get 3 choices, and they're going to be +1 cooldown use, they're going to be attacks with this weapon penetrate X% fire resistance, and they're going to be increased grenade damage. It is worth noting that this is a settle. There are better mods that you could get instead of 108% increased grenade damage. It's actually 101 to 121%, but this is the best you can get at this sort of price range. So at this point, Broodcore has been upgraded. It is now an Abyss influenced item, and we're selecting the grenade modifier. We have 3 desirable prefixes, 2 of them very good and 1 of them serviceable, and we have a rubbish suffix. Our next step is going to be to throw a perfect essence of battle on the item. However, so the Omen of Dextral Crystallization is one of the best omens in the game. It's pretty rare, it's extremely useful, and as a result, it's something that can be in hot demand. We want to add a perfect essence of battle for +5 to the level of all attack skills. That part we're definitely going to do, but we can do it with or without protection here. If we go for with protection, then we're going to be using an Omen of Dextral Crystallization up, and that is going to protect all of the work that we've done so far on the item. If we decide to go without protection, then we could end up destroying the item that we've created so far, but we will end up not destroying a very expensive omen. Which one of these is better is going to depend upon the market conditions at the time you are performing this craft. Or if you're in solo self-found, of course, you're just going to have to go based upon what you've actually earned. Now, option 1 is expensive and deterministic. So option 1 is we use the Omen of Dextral Crystallization to absolutely positively guarantee we don't ruin the item. And this means the Omen sacrifices itself to protect what we've achieved so far. Here, we get the +5 to the level of attack skills, and that replaces the existing modifier that's on the item. At this point, we have 4 modifiers on the item, 3 of them are excellent, 1 of them is serviceable, and we're just going to apply additional modifiers through the use of your choice, Greater Exalt or Perfect Exalt. Perfect Exalt obviously costs a lot more and may or may not be worth it, but it will give better results. Here, you're just fishing for more good modifiers. You probably won't get them. The suffix pool on crossbows for grenades is not all that great. And so for that reason, I would personally recommend that you fill out the item with Greater Exalted Orbs, but ultimately the choice is up to you. Also, because we're going to be double exalting, you may as well use an Omen of Greater Exaltation in order to make that a little bit cheaper. So option 2 is not guaranteed to work. However, I do prefer option 2 overall. Option 2, you're accepting a little bit of a risk, but you're saving yourself a very expensive and very precious Omen. This time, what we're going to do is apply 2 Greater Exalted Orbs to our item. Perfect Exalted Orbs would be wasteful here. Save those for your very best crafts. But at the same time, you don't want to use Classic Exalted Orbs because you really don't want to get one of the +1, +2, or +3 to projectile skill rolls that are banned by the use of a Greater Exalted Orb. So with your Greater Exalt, you could hit +4, +5, +6, or +7 to projectile skills here. If you hit 5, 6, or 7, fantastic. You've got a better item than you would have otherwise got, and you've saved your Omen. If you hit +4, that's disappointing. That's actually the worst outcome you're going to see. The other thing that can happen though is you just fill up with mods like mana gain on hit, life gain on kill, things like that that are just not very important to you. Once you've got full mods on the item, you then apply a Perfect Essence of Battle, and 1 mod is going to be added, which is going to be +5 to the level of attack skills. And at the same time, 1 suffix modifier has to be deleted. Only a suffix modifier can be deleted when the mods are full. At this point, you end up with your completed item, and it's going to look something like the version of the crossbow that I wound up with here. You might have different suffix modifiers on it, but those suffix modifiers are generally not very important. Once more, a reminder, attack speed just isn't that important a stat on grenades. It's okay, but it's a quality of life stat rather than a DPS stat. Ultimately, you are limited by your cooldowns rather than being limited by anything else. So that's the budget approach for creating an Arbiter-ready crossbow for a grenade build. I'm going to leave it there. May your Val Orbs have interesting results.